Guys, my grandma has schizophrenia, but all the treatments are giving her so many side effects. What should we do?
Well, actually, there's a new drug called Cobenfy, and it has less side effects than the normal schizophrenia drugs. You should try it.
And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in our 5th episode of Doctor's Discoveries. This is Ellen.
And this is Shanti.
This is Serena.
This is Sharvi.
So, Shanti, do you want to talk more about the background information of this drug?
Yeah, so first off, schizophrenia is a chronic mental illness that affects a person's ability to think, feel, and behave normally, and often causes people to have hallucinations. It's a lifelong condition, and it has a strong genetic component, and studies have shown that individuals with a family history of schizophrenia are at a higher risk of developing the order themselves. Serena, do you want to talk about the symptoms?
Yeah, sure. So, schizophrenic symptoms can be divided into positive, negative, and cognitive symptoms. So, positive symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, and just like in general, disorganized thinking and experiences that normal people don't have. And the negative symptoms involved weird and like not normal behaviors like less emotional expression and like lack of motivation and being less social in general. And cognitive symptoms affect thinking and memory, which leads to issues like attention, decision-making, and short-term memory.
Yeah, so how does schizophrenia actually work? It's basically neurotransmitter abnormalities, and the general idea is that dopamine activity is too high in certain parts of the brain in schizophrenia, which therefore drugs that are used to treat schizophrenia act to reduce dopamine activity. And the bad thing is that some dopamine increasing drugs like alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, or more can actually increase behavior that similarly resembles schizophrenia.
So basically, Cobenfy is a schizophrenia drug, and it's a dual drug treatment made up of xanomeline, and trospium chloride. And so basically, xanomeline is a muscarinic receptor agonist. So it basically targets M1 and M4 receptors in the brain. And then trospium chloride is a peripheral muscarine antagonist, and it blocks receptors outside the brain to reduce side effects. And then together they form a really smart combo because one drug goes to the brain to treat symptoms while the other protects the rest of the body from the side effects.
Yeah, so a little bit more in detail. The receptors it activates is the muscarinic acetyl. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, muscarinic. Acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Wait, search it up.
Yeah, those are the receptors in the brain, and they help regulate neurotransmitters, which relates to schizophrenia symptoms. So by activating these, it kind of helps calm down these transmitters that release or cause the symptoms of schizophrenia.
And then there's usually there are 5 types of muscarinic receptors. M1 through M5, but Cobenfy specifically targets M1 and M4. So M1 is found in areas like the hippocampus and cortex, and these regions handle cognitive function, memory, and executive control, like decision making. And then M4 is found in the striatum, which regulates dopamine activity, and this is really important because dopamine dysregulation is a core feature of schizophrenia. And so Cobenfy isn't blocking dopamine like typical antipsychotics. It helps regulate dopamine indirectly by stimulating M4 receptors. So basically, xanomeline, it binds to the M1 and M4 receptors, and then it activates them, and that helps normalize neural circuits that are overactive or underactive in schizophrenia. And then M1 stimulation may improve disorganized thinking, cognitive symptoms, learning and memory. And then M4 stimulation reduces dopamine releases in areas like nucleus accumbens, which help control positive symptoms like hallucination and delusions. Do you want to talk more about it, Ellen?
Yeah, that sounds really cool, but I also want to explain more about the clinical studies that have been done using this drug. So, during the clinical studies, it is shown that there was a lot of significant symptom relief versus the actual placebo in the trial, which the placebo was a sugar pill. And overall, there was a big improvement across the range of symptoms. Basically, one of the studies was studied in a 5-week clinical study with 470 adults aged 18 to 65. So basically, children or teenagers all the way to elders, and all of them had schizophrenia, and they either took the real Cobenfy pill or the placebo. And what makes this clinical trial really, really accurate and also very reliable is that it included the Emergent program, which is a very credible program. Serena, do you want to add more to that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of real patient stories since this drug has came out for adults. So Cobenfy has shown a lot of promise in improving the quality of life for people with schizophrenia, and clinical trials, as Ellen said, reported that patients experience relief of many symptoms, which lets them function better daily, and some patients were even able to return to work and engage more fully in social activities, which is a positive impact on their overall well-being. Doctors shared that some patients actually did worse on Cobenfy and became impulsive and arguably more psychotic compared to before taking the drugs, which show that this drug isn't like 100%. This doesn't work 100% of the time. And extreme side effects sometimes even made it impossible for some schizophrenic people to continue taking the drug. For example, a doctor tried one patient on Cobenfy, but they couldn't tolerate it due to nausea despite taking it as recommended, even though it has less side effects than the traditional drugs.
Yeah, so the nausea and vomiting often occurred in the first 2 weeks of the treatment, but also it was shown that it decreased over time, as studies showed that also in the first week, nausea rates were at 10%, but in the second, it went down to 3%. And then the third week, it went down to 1%, and fifth week to 0.5%. And these are similar outcomes for vomiting as well. Shanti, do you want to add more about the side effects?
Yeah, so we already talked about nausea and vomiting, but it's shown that 17.6% of people taking Cobenfy lost weight, while 4.1% gained weight. Also, you could have high blood pressure, a stomach upset, or stomach pain. So,
yeah, and on top of that, there are some more serious side effects as well, such as urinary retention, slow stomach emptying, allergic reactions, which swell up the face and the lips, and there's also an increased risk for individuals with liver or kidney issues.
Yeah. Cobenfy is a really great new treatment for people with schizophrenia, but there are some patients that are not recommended to take this drug, and some of these patients are people with active biliary disease, gastrointestinal obstructive disorders, or urinary retention problems.
Yeah, so the coolest thing about this drug and why it's so groundbreaking is because most antipsychotics block dopamine D2 receptors, which can help, but it causes side effects like Parkinson, like tremors, or emotional dullness, weight gain, long-term brain changes. But xanomeline doesn't touch dopamine receptors directly, so it influences dopamine upstream by fixing how acetylcholine regulates the system. So this means there's fewer dopamine-related side effects, and it's a totally new way to treat schizophrenia. Still, there's a problem with using xanomeline alone because it's just too strong in the body, which is why there are the side effects that were explained earlier. And then that's why there's trospium chloride, because it makes the treatment more tolerable without messing with how it works in the brain.
So traditionally, a patient with schizophrenia would take isoprinon, iotaront, or clozapine, depending on their diagnosis, and Cobenfy offers a new approach for those who haven't responded well to their traditional treatments, such as my grandma.
I really hope your grandma feels better. So thank you everyone for listening to our 5th episode. Bye. See you next week.
A quick disclaimer, this podcast was made, researched, and hosted by high school students, so not everything we say here may be 100% factual.